Welcome to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. On this show, we interview agritourism farmers, authors, leaders, and influencers who share their insights on growing and monetizing your agritourism business. Here's your host, Dustin Reed.
Hi, welcome to The Recurring Plot. I'm your host, Dustin Reed, where we talk about all things RVs and how to earn recurring income from your property. Today, we have a special guest joining us today. Her name is Jayce Hafner. Jayce grew up, well, I'll let her kind of explain how she grew up, but mainly she grew up in Virginia. She's experienced firsthand the challenges small farmers face in growing their businesses. After completing an MBA and Masters of Environmental Science at Stanford, Jayce co-founded FarmRaise, a groundbreaking platform that helps farmers master their finances by streamlining their financial data. Through FarmRaise, Jayce has created a thriving community of over 20,000 innovative farmers who are connecting a vital funding opportunity and cultivating joy and sustainability in their work. We're excited to learn from your expertise today, Jayce. We're so excited to have you here on the podcast. So for those that obviously don't know you or may know you, but let's give them a refresher. What's kind of your background? I believe you were raised on a cattle farm. Can you give a little insight about your background?
Yeah, Dustin, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this dialogue, be part of Recurring Plot. It's wonderful to be here. I come from a small farming background. My parents were first-generation farmers on a small diversified livestock farm in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. So as you can imagine, growing up in that context, I really got to be a part of the farm life, the farm business, helping my dad out with the cattle and with our goats. I had a small chicken business when I was growing up, and it was just an awesome childhood in so many ways. I'm so grateful to my parents for choosing that for us. And I learned that growing a farm business is really hard. Small farmers don't have a lot of good options when it comes to tools and resources to organize their financial data and then to make really smart choices for their business. So that grounding really provided the spark that got me on the path that I'm on today, going to study land issues at Stanford, going to study business at Stanford, and teaming up with my amazing co-founder, Sammy Telleton, who has a background. She had worked at the USDA before we started FarmRaise. And we found each other in business school and had an unconventional experience in grad school in a lot of ways because we spent our time talking to a bunch of farmers and ranchers on both coasts, small diversified livestock producers on the East Coast to large to mid-sized Midwestern row crop operations, and then specialty crop growers and ranchers in California, where there's such amazing access to agriculture in the Bay Area. And all these different types of producers told us the same thing, which is, could you just build us a TurboTax for farm funding?
Well, you obviously there's that need because I love your background because I kind of have a similar background. I grew up on a dairy, but I didn't continue on with I was one of the few that, well, I think that happens with a lot of my friends that I've known growing up, being sons and daughters of agriculture. A lot of times you don't necessarily get into what your parents do unless you actually have a huge passion for it, just because I've seen firsthand the headaches it could bring, especially the financial side. My grandfather kind of experienced that. He wasn't profitable for a number of years until he met my step grandma, which is actually my grandma that I know my whole life. She ended up becoming his bookkeeper, and ended up, that's how they were able to be successful, just because you have to be good with numbers. You got to, especially with agriculture, obviously.
And that's so interesting. Like when we look at a lot of our customers today, it's often a couple team that's running the operation. One of them is doing a lot of the hands-on stuff and the other one is doing the books. Right. And obviously there's some crossover, but they often tend to split it that way. And so we're realizing that as we're selling this tool to farmers, you really have to cater to both spouses or partners in the operation, because one will likely be in the books more than the other.
Yep. And it's so interesting to me, just because my grandpa passed away about 10 years ago, but he instilled in me a lot of things, just because I ended up growing up on that dairy. And I had my mother, and I had a stepfather as well, where I was always working. So there's things that I could attribute to my background that I could see that's benefited me now. What's kind of helped you, like with your background, and helped you succeed with the things that you're doing with your business, with FarmRaise right now as a platform? What kind of have you taken from your childhood to what you're cultivating in your business?
Yeah, that's such a great question, Dustin. I would be curious to hear what your farming background has brought forward for you. In my experience, one thing that really comes to mind is, so for most of my childhood, we were often just kind of trying to keep up with the business. We weren't being as proactive as we could be because we had so much going on. There was not enough time in the day. We didn't have great tools to optimize our business. But when I was a teenager, my dad got really proactive about trying to learn more innovative practices for our farm, including soil health practices, regenerative agriculture practices is what some people call them. But really, it all comes down to investing in the organic matter of the soil in innovative ways, or maybe ways that are older than the conventional agriculture practices we have today, but have not been completely popularized in the same way as we saw growing up in our time. And so my dad was getting back to these practices and really interested in learning more about them. But for us as livestock producers, transitioning to more soil health practices like holistically managing our cows in a way that we graze them in a managed grazing pattern using electric fence across a paddock so that we could invest more in the soil health, that practice required a lot of upfront capital to invest in electric fencing, in new watering systems to match the grazing patterns. It just felt like there were a lot of barriers in place. And so my dad put his head together with our local extension agent. Extension agents are just amazing resources for farmers. I'm so grateful that we have land grant universities and folks like that who are working on the ground. And they were able to help us apply for a cost share grant from the USDA called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Are you familiar with this program, Justin?
I haven't, but we do talk about a lot of these programs. We actually have, and I'll plug this right. I guess right now we do have basically like a 5D challenge. It's a free challenge where we do talk about how landowners or property owners or anyone that's interested in getting funding, where the best way to try to raise that, or try to, whether it's your local, national, state, national. So there's different branches of government obviously can help, mainly obviously agriculture and other things that are going to be able to help. So we do talk a bit about, but I'm not obviously as detailed as you, which is great because obviously that's what you do. And so tell me, so your dad was able to get that grant, and how that helped your guys with the business or setting that up successfully? I
Yeah.
assume it's successful.
It was such a learning for me that I think set me on a professional path in a really powerful way. And what happened is we applied for the grant. It took some upfront paperwork, and it was a really long wait time. These grants or these cost share programs, you don't hear back immediately usually.
Yeah, that's kind of been my experiences with, or hearing with my grandfather. Like, you have to have your financials pretty straightforward. It's a lot of paperwork as well, depending on what you're applying for. And then there's different requirements depending on what you're applying to, I'm assuming. And so it can be, I assume, daunting. It's daunting. I've never done it personally, but I've seen secondhand how daunting it can be, and sometimes frustrating as well. So
yeah, you really do have to get your ducks in a row and do some self-education, understand what the program can do for your operation. And then you have to deal with paperwork and you have to wait. So after all that, it's understandable that a lot of farmers would be burnt out after going through that. But we were really fortunate. We were able to get enrolled in the cost share program. And we were fortunate because that program is oversubscribed nationally. We're talking about 25 to 30% of farmers across the US who want to get enrolled in EQIP actually do make it. And that has a lot to do with what practices they want to do on their farms and how that ranks against the resource concerns priorities of their local government, or excuse me, their local region. And that maps is sort of like, depending on where you are, the local region will be more concerned about a certain resource concern than another. So doing your homework can help you be more competitive, but it still is a challenging process. So when we got that cost share program and we invested in that electric fence, we got those new watering systems in, we started running our cows differently. Within the first year, we started seeing our costs going down in a really meaningful way. And this is because the grass, the alfalfa, the forage that our cattle were feeding on, it was a lot healthier. And it actually stayed good enough for the cattle to keep grazing on for 3 additional months in the
Wow.
year. We were able to get it up to 3 additional months. And so what that translated to is lower input costs for us. We didn't
Right.
have to invest in hay,
Right.
bringing hay in for the cows. And so in terms of our bottom line, that ended up boosting our profitability by about $40 an acre.
And
Yeah.
that's super important, especially with farming, just because there's so many like different supply chains that affect your way of basically your way of living, just because, and sometimes something that's happening on the other side of the world affects what's going on locally. A lot of people don't understand those, especially that's why farmers actually pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the world. A lot of people think they may not know what's going on, but they're probably they, for me, have been one of the most informed people.
We're trying to be, for sure. And I think what's really beautiful about agriculture is it is a huge market. And something I really admire about the way my dad has now, I think, scaled the learnings and the impact of this one cost share program that we got enrolled in is he's realized that the natural resource assets we use to grow our farm, that's not just soil and air and water on our property. We are intrinsically linked to the land all around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so being able to really reap the benefits of new practices and soil health and decreased erosion and increased organic matter relies on an entire community effort. And we're all selling into, many of our neighbors, we're all selling into similar markets, but the market is really, really big. And we actually have more games to reap if we work together and share these benefits with each other. And one thing that my dad's done, which I think is really cool, is he has gone out, teamed up with our neighbors, and they're working on plans to invest more in the biological diversity of the fields, a patchwork of fields surrounding our property and the property of our neighbors. And they're doing things that encourage like really a multi-species community. You talk about all the natural resource assets, like humans are one part of this, but we also depend on a lot of other biological species to help us grow. Some instances of that in the East Coast are red-winged blackbird, the kestrel. These birds keep the insect population, the rodent population in check, and that trickles down to soil health in like a really powerful way. In California, we have the checker spot butterfly, we have the burrowing owl. Like these are all species that help maintain working lands in a really meaningful way. And if we have their presence on our operations, we are going to be more successful. But that requires work beyond just a single farmer's fence line. We have to work together. And that's something that we are really passionate about scaling at FarmRaise, is not just individual financial access, but also resources and education that hopefully can empower that patchwork of farms. Because gosh, you think about all the small farms across the US, they still control about half of America's acreage is what I read last, which is huge. Working lands acreage. It's a huge percentage. And you think about all those small farms individually, it's not a lot of land, but collectively, that's a huge, huge impact in terms of being able to up level the productivity and the soil health of our American landscape.
How have you helped streamline farmers and connect their financial data to other opportunities? Kind of like your father, obviously he didn't have the tool, the tool that you developed or helped develop. And I mean, how have you helped farmers with the platform that FarmRaise has?
Let's talk about the FarmRaise product. The first thing that we built as a very, very low code, simple tool that we put out on the market to see if there was hunger for farmers to try it out was a simplified application for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. Sammy and I were both familiar with it. We knew there was a need there. So we said, let's see if farmers will use it and if they'll pay for a simpler application experience. And so we put that out there. And then when we saw hundreds of farmers going through that, we were like, oh, okay, cool. There's an opportunity here. Let's build more.
So I have a follow-up. I can have a question with that, just because obviously technology has grown, and we've noticed kind of an education process that you have to do with certain farmers, and I'm not sure, how have you guys, what kind of education process or what kind of onboarding do you guys have to do with farmers, or what kind of things? I mean, what does that look like when you're first introducing something with your platform to the farmers? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, the farmers that we are working with, we've found to generally have one thing in common, which is they want to innovate. They're very open-minded. They want to try something new. They want to leverage the best in class expertise or education or resources to grow their operation. So they're looking for opportunity. And that mindset, I think, also influences their behavior around technology. A lot of the farmers that we work with, whether they're in their 70s or whether they're in their 20s, are are pretty tech savvy, whether they are using their phone for various farm management apps or if they just happen to be trolling on Facebook and we're trolling on Facebook and we connect there. But we found the digital leap to actually not be really all that too different. Or I think farmers often are viewed as being slow to adopt new technology. But what's really interesting is I think farmers have been some of the first movers around innovation and technological adoption. When you think about all of the new technologies that have been developed over the past 100 years, farmers have really been on the cutting edge of that. And I think that also is going to apply to their adoption. And we see that applying day over day here at FarmRaise in the digital realm. The one thing I will say, though, that we really try to gear our tools to be is to be a tool that a farmer can use in a field. Something that's very easy to hold in your hand. Do what you need to do. Minimize the number of entries that you have to make into your phone as you're doing it, and ideally have it be something that minimizes that screen time so the farmer can be up looking around and figuring out what they need to do next in the real world. We don't want to build something with a lot of bells and whistles and pulls the farmer in and like keeps their attention. We actually want to build something that a farmer can use that's very similar to the other types of non-digital tools that they may be using.
So this sounds really weird. Like this is like right up my alley because I'm a UX UI designer.
Oh,
And
amazing.
so,
You must be
so
thinking about this every day.
I think about this stuff every day. And then I also think just because there can be fatigue especially with anyone that's learning a technology. I'm not saying that they're learning, but it sounds like you guys kind of you simplified the process or made it to where you're not going to have that user fatigue or people just kind of give up through the process, which is great because that's kudos on your end. That means you guys have researched your users, researched the farmers, what the end goal, what that is, and then streamlining that process to make it easy for the farmers or easy for any person in agriculture to go through that process, which is huge value to the farmers themselves because I deal with making products with Curb and Turf and also with other businesses. And it's not an easy feat. It's very, very hard and very difficult because you have to learn from your users, and then based on their behavior and what they're doing, you have to modify that or change that, sounds like you guys have been, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like you guys done a great job with that.
Well, it didn't happen the first time. We put revs in and realized, in order for the farmer to really have the optimal experience, it took a lot of tests, a lot of trial and error. And as we kept doing these revs, we were like, oh, of course, we need to build something that's very simple, can be used in the field so that the farmer is able to do what they do best. We don't want to build a distracting tool. We want to build a tool that's simple, direct, gets done what you need to get done, and the farmer can be back out paying attention to the real world.
So do you guys have any offline tools or any things that you have to do offline?
We're very proud of the app. Yeah, the mobile app we shipped it works great offline.
That's great. That's something that we focus on as well because we have our app. I'm assuming you're in the in Google Play Store and in the App Store, right? For iOS. Perfect. So look for both of our apps for Curb and Turf and for and FarmRaise. I mean, because that's not easy because there's certain things, functionality and stuff where it's a lot easier when you have a connection, and then when you're so. That's great that you guys have done that and made it simple because especially when you're in rural areas and stuff, we found that's super important to have that a lot of offline features or things that once you connect back to some kind of network or whatever, then it ends up you could upload whatever information and store that. And I could geek out on this for a while, but I'm not going to.
Having that usability is key, and then also making sure so that you can hit the ground running when you're back online.
That's amazing. That's awesome that you guys do that, and you guys thought about that, and it really does tell me that you guys listen to your end users, and that's super huge. And I don't think farmers will ever understand that, but that's fine. I mean, just because they don't need to know. What are some of the financial resources that farmers need when starting or expanding their operations? I mean, obviously that's different for depending on what you're doing, but typically, what have you seen based on your experience?
Yeah, and the red letter one, when you're first getting started, is many farmers dream of owning land, acquiring
Mm,
land, because there is so much potential once you have that equity in the landscape, both in terms of the financial outcomes, but also mentally having that sort of that piece of land that you can invest in across generations. And many of us who are getting into farming don't have the luxury of necessarily getting land passed down to us.
right.
I am very fortunate that I have that. But a lot of our customers we're working with are first generation farmers, or their grandparents or parents had to sell the farm, and so they're starting over again. And so getting that land is often the first barrier that a lot of farmers see as a barrier.
Mm,
And it's hard because there are not a lot of grants out there for land acquisition that are big enough for land acquisition. The price of land
right.
is so expensive, especially depending where you're acquiring in the US. And a lot of farmers understandably look at the debt ratio calculus that they see, and they're like, nope, not worth it. And so we find that is often something that farmers experience as a huge barrier. And what we try to tell farmers and encourage farmers to do is, if they're at a point where taking on that debt, or if they don't have the ability to get investors or equity to back them in some way, shape, or form, to instead use what they can, whether it's through renting, or maybe they just currently have a small house with a small plot of land. Use that to start with a backyard garden. Start testing out your market and market demand if you're a beginning farmer, to de-risk your business. Use whatever asset you can get your hands on to just start de-risking your business, even if you don't
Mhm.
own the land outright.
Right.
So I wish I could say, yeah, there's this amazing $1 million grant that 50% of farmers are eligible for and can get. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of grants out there that are anywhere near and close enough, big enough to be able to support land acquisition. There are some good loan programs for land acquisition out there, and one that we point a lot of farmers to are FSA, Farm Service Agency loans. These are loans through the USDA. They have lower interest rates, and I do think some farmers get intimidated by the application paperwork associated with that process and the wait times, and maybe even working with the USDA if they haven't before. But at FarmRaise, we try to help them jumpstart that relationship, because having that good relationship with your local USDA rep is critical, because that person can help you navigate so many aspects of resource, basically getting the right resources for your farm and then investing those resources in the best way. When you're working with your local USDA natural resources conservation official, they can come out to your landscape and walk through your field and help you figure out how to invest the capital you're getting in the best way in your property. And FarmRaise is all about catalyzing that relationship and supplementing it. Our goal is to get the farmer ready to apply for these programs by organizing their data and ready to report on these programs in an ongoing way once they are enrolled. So I can talk more about the products that have come after the simplified equip application. And really the goal of what we're building is to organize farmer financial data so they're always ready to take advantage of opportunity. And the way our product works is we have this very simple cash flow tracking app where a farmer can tag and track every transaction they have coming in, and every transaction of revenue, every transaction of expense, and tag it back to their farm tax categories that you have to fill out on your Schedule F. And as they're doing this ritual, we also send the farmer grants, cost share, financial incentives programs in their local area, so they can take advantage of that too and quickly seize that opportunity as they're organizing their financials in an ongoing way.
I just want to say kudos to you guys, because you're dealing with two things I feel are difficult. One is is the government, because you're streamlining to where it's making it a lot faster for the end user. Tax, like, you also have to I'm sure you have to keep up on the different tax code or different taxation or tax codes that there may be for farmers and everything else. Gee, that's amazing that you guys provide that to farmers and that you're able to do that. And that's such a, if I feel like if this is around 20 years ago, I would probably be a farmer right now. Just because, and I'm serious, just because there's so many obstacles that farmers face, and a lot of it has to do with. I love your advice of buying land, like getting land. That's probably the biggest barrier to entry for a lot of these farmers or anyone that's starting out, is just having access to land. I know several people that lease. I mean, so already you're pulling your margins, just because the more and more you're taking away from the end, you're capping yourself basically, right? Because there's so many things that you need to overcome. And I love that suggestion of starting small, even if then that way you could, like you were saying, just kind of weed out, if you will, those things that are going to affect you if you plan on going bigger. Because if you plan on scaling, you need to first do it small and then do it big. I think some people kind of see ahead to, or have the foresight, but they need to realize that there's so many smaller steps that you need to take.
That's our goal. Thank you. I think, definitely any stress and uncertainty that we can relieve is our mission. We're really trying to save the farmer time, stress, and uncertainty as they're running their businesses.
So what kind of success stories have you guys had within your program, or within your platform, I should say?
Yeah, I'd say daily doses of really exciting stories that we get are farmers who download the app for the first time and enter their first transaction. They're like, oh my gosh, this was so easy. I love that. It gives me little bursts of joy whenever I hear those. And those are regularly sprinkled throughout our daily work. But I'd say in terms of a more sweeping, dramatic story, I can give you an example of a customer who recently sent us this beautiful letter about how she had come to our platform and was specifically using it to jumpstart her relationship with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And she said that she used our tools to complete her Farm Service Agency records to apply for EQIP. And she said that when she took those completed applications and handed them to her USDA official, they said they'd never seen two better completed applications in their entire career. And he immediately approved her for funding, which was truly miraculous, because often it takes at least a few months before that happens. And she was able to get started on a really, really strong foot with her local representative. And she has all these really ambitious plans. She has a llama farm that she invests in that operation and grow it. And she's using us as a partner there. And we're part of her team of teams. What I think is really exciting about what we're building is it works really well in partnership with the USDA, with the other stakeholders too, accountants, lenders that Linda will eventually touch and work with as she grows. Our goal is to really be that data structuring, financial, saving you time, stress, and money partner.
That's cool. That's awesome. And that's something that I think speaks well to a lot of people, just because you have to, especially if you own land, or if you're a farmer already, or you have some kind of agritourism business, it's important you have to diversify as well. So you have to look for opportunities to expand, to grow. And it takes money to make money. And so, and anytime you're able to get these grants or loans, or hopefully it helps you in the long run, because then you're going to be making a plan, and that's part of obviously the process of what goes on. And I love that she's the llama farm. Is that what it was?
She's a llama farmer.
That's awesome.
Alpacas, yeah.
Yep. So we actually have a couple alpaca farms on our platform, which is funny. So yeah, it's so great, and I love to see the diversification. There's so many things that you wouldn't normally think of that are businesses, that are actual business, just because, and which is great. And anyone listening to this, because this is something that we really speak of on our platform, Recurring Plot, is to try to earn some kind of recurring income, hence recurring, and then plot just meaning your land. And so another good way to do that is anyone listening to this that is looking to diversify your land, maybe have RVers stay on your property. That's something a lot of people probably don't know how big of a industry that is. There's more than 500,000 RVs units being sold, but not enough places for them to go. Yeah. So a lot of times you see these places where these storage units where they have tons of RVs, but they just don't have anywhere to go. So we've seen a huge basically needs in both markets where farmers are looking to diversify their income stream. And then RVers are looking for places to go, right? And we have different options on our platform. We have an a la carte option where if you offer classes, offer different products, you could actually feature those on our website or on your site. So basically it's exactly like Airbnb for RVers. And so then that way RVers could look for different places to stay for the night, and you as the host set the price, and then you get 85% of that transaction or any transaction that goes through our platform, which is pretty.
Oh, I love that. What I love about your model especially is so many of these small farmers are looking for ways to diversify their income streams and to monetize the assets they have on their farm, ideally in a way that's not incredibly labor intensive or time intensive. And something that we've been really inspired by as we've learned more about how farmers are doing this is how we see many farmers stacking agritourism activities on their farm.
Yep.
And it could be through hosting RVs on their property. It could be through hosting guests, glamping, and often both in the same, stacking those together. And then on top of that, we also see farmers doing things like planting sunflowers and having photography during harvest season on their farm where couples can come and take pictures of their newborn baby. There's just so many creative things you can do. And what I love about your platform is you've made it really easy for farmers to just plug and play and get started on a new monetization stream.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think I think it's great that you're providing that platform for farmers that they're able to find different ways to find income or get grants, and knowing that it ends up being a tool that they could use. It's really super important because once they find the funding, then you have to, if you get a loan, some kind of loan, there's that stress of paying it back, but then you have to diversify your income. So this is another good way to do that. And I've seen with so many farmers, so many agri businesses where they're able to do that, because a lot of it used to be you were writing on a harvest, or you're writing on a certain thing that happens on the farm or on the ranch or whatever it is. And you're kind of putting your eggs almost in one basket in a way. And it's just so risky when you end up doing something like that. And that's why it's super important. We're huge proponents of just get more land, just because that's something where you can't make more of it. It's just one of those commodities where it doesn't reproduce itself unless you're basic in Hawaii, maybe, but like that's like maybe like an inch a year or whatever it is. Like, but the thing is that's it's such a good investment to have, is having land, and then you could just work from that, and it's just a really safe investment. And I really love that you provide those tools where people can actually expand and seek for more opportunities, which is huge. So talking a little bit more about that, what are some other kind of barriers to entry or barriers that farmers face when trying to scale their operations? And we've talked about how you help alleviate that, but what are some other things that maybe someone might want to look out for? And how does FarmRaise address some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the financial barriers and access to finance and paperwork and time associated with that financial barrier. We see two other challenges out there, one that we are currently addressing and another that we really want to get to. We also sort of an order of operations problem, and there are a lot of other organizations that inspire us that are working on both of these. The first one is the sort of knowledge is power need. Getting knowledge and sharing knowledge with each other. Farming is constantly innovating. We're constantly testing new things. Most of the farmers we work with are kind of like startups. They're small businesses that are in the first 10 years of their operation. They're iterating, they're pivoting, they're figuring things out, and sharing those best practices with each other is one of the most, I think, important ways that farmers can help each other grow and scale and be successful with that knowledge sharing piece. And I think there's been a blossoming of a lot of great knowledge sharing because of YouTube. In the past 10 years, like farmer YouTube is so hot. I don't see it ever stop being hot in the next 10 years from now. Like, my dad watches it and gets so much out of it. There are all these farmer influencers that have cropped up now, not just on YouTube now, but also Instagram and TikTok. And we work with some of them, and they're great for getting the word out about different and innovative things you can do to scale. And we see a lot of sort of virtual community happening, but that speaks to the second need that I think really needs addressing is like real community on farms. Like back in the day, you had the Grange, or you all went to a place of worship together or hung out in some physical space. And now I think farming is becoming increasingly isolated, especially as we're seeing this generational shift happening. We're not hanging out so much. Young farmers are hanging out in physical spaces less. Fortunately, we have conferences, but how do we create real community with each other and support each other? And maybe that is in a digital sphere, but there's more intention associated with it and stronger bonds formed. I really think having one of the things that's been so helpful in my founder journey is I have a group of other entrepreneurs that I meet with every few weeks, and we share best practices. We talk about the challenges, we support each other. And I keep thinking, man, if like my dad could have had that with like 4 other farm entrepreneurs, that would have been awesome. But just that social support piece is something that I think there's a ton of opportunity for innovation around. And I think tech could be a tool that helps to break those bonds stronger as our generation rises to the forefront of farming.
I think I love what you just said, just because I've seen that change so much as far as education, people going online and being on YouTube. I've interviewed some influencers and stuff, and I love their platforms. I love what they have to say. It's such an educational tool, and it's so great to see that. And it is highly entertaining to be. I mean, a lot of people, and I've noticed that during COVID. I'm not sure, how long have you guys been, when were you guys founded?
We were founded when we were both still in school in 2020, but
Okay.
we launched our cash flow tracking app at the end of last year, and we got our first sort of MVP on the market, I'd say in 2021 in the most full form. So we're pretty new still, and yeah.
So I think you guys entered it at a really good time, just because, especially where it's tech, and we had a pandemic, and you guys were, but I'm also sure there's some pain, obviously a lot of pain points in dealing with that. What were some of the things that you guys experienced during trying to get your operations up and running during the pandemic?
There were lots of challenges. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to pinpoint specifically where we saw the biggest ones around the pandemic. It was a time when there was a lot of pessimism and I think psychological uncertainty, and a lot of farmers were hurting really bad. Like we were hearing about livestock producers in the Midwest that were having to slaughter thousands of
Yes.
a day, which is just like so traumatic and tough. And just like that was the mood in the farming world when we started out. And so I think our earliest customers were coming in with a lot of uncertainty and fear. And we were too. We didn't know what was going to happen in agriculture with supply chains and that sort of thing. What ended up happening is a lot of farmers did go online looking for financial resources and financial relief in the face of the supply chain shortages and uncertainty. And we were able to help them get some of that. The CFAP, the COVID relief program that went to farmers, that was in 2020, and we were able to help with that. And that was
awesome.
A gift in a lot of ways, but it was a really tough time to be a farmer for sure. And like you alluded to this before, like farmers are watching so many macro trends, and that like the lack of certainty there can have like a real psychological impact. And so the pandemic especially, I think, was a hard time.
Yeah. I think you hit on some key points, especially and it's not just farmers, like you mentioned, like society is where we're saying that we're more social than ever, but we're more antisocial than ever, if that makes sense, because those places of community really don't exist in the physical world, right? Unless you're, like you're saying, unless you're going to a convention or you're meeting up somewhere, and those are happening less and less. Like maybe it's a church or whatever. That's on the decline as well. We've noticed, and a lot of those havens or safe places are being, there's less and less of those now. So I think it's super important to have, and I love what you're saying, is just there is a lot of uncertainty, but there's so many people that are sharing their story, so many people that are online and looking to have that outreach and looking to make, even if it's virtual. I love the fact that there's still those even safe places online. And so do you guys participate in any like conventions, or have you done any conventions in the past, or have
we do. When we have, one of my favorites was the big soil health event in Iowa. It's a bunch of largely row crop, but diversified farmers who are coming in and really just like talking about science. They're talking about how to optimize different nutrients in their resources, what practices have yielded what outcomes. They're sharing knowledge, they're sharing community, and it's a bunch of innovators. These farmers all come in with this similar, like very innovative mindset, and it's across generations. We saw so many farmers bringing in like farmers who are probably, I'd say maybe the baby boomer generation coming in with a Gen Z or a millennial tagging along. And it may or may not have been a relative. That was the cool thing, but it was somebody who was patchwork. The patchwork of fields was one of those neighbors, maybe 10 minutes over, they brought with them to the conference.
Right. People may not see this, but I'm smiling from ear to ear just because we've experienced the same thing on other conventions. We didn't know how big it was until we actually went to a convention, and how willing people were willing to share ideas and to progress and be willing to change. It's so refreshing to because I didn't grow up that way. I grew up on a dairy farm where it was just kind of like you helped your neighbors and stuff like that. Like you knew your neighbor from like a mile down the road or wherever it was, like those, and you're super close, but you didn't necessarily share like your deepest business knowledge. And I love that you've seen that. I've definitely seen that with conventions that we've gone to. So we go to one that's called NAFTMA, where it's just, it opened my eyes, where I was just like, holy, I never would have dreamt of anything like this, it's just so cool to see communities like that. And the more that we look online, the more we see how much is being shared, which it's such a great community. And so we're so blessed to have those as users and as people, that it's just a cool experience. So obviously you have a connection to the farmers and farming because you kind of grew up that way. Is there like anything that you're worried about in the future that you can foresee?
Just so I understand the question, is this like a challenge you're thinking farmers would face, or is just a challenge in general getting into ag?
What they face.
Yeah, I think there's so much opportunity in the young, beginning, small farm segment. In the last ag census, beginning farmers grew by almost 20% as a contingent. And a lot of the narrative out there that we see is focus on the largest farms as being the real, I guess, the power behind
Right.
climate change action, or like the power behind what food is produced for the world. These big farms are very important, and there's a lot of technology and a lot of startups that are gearing their products toward these large farms. But the small beginning young farmer market is huge. It's huge, and it is growing. And this target segment is operating about half of America's landscape right now. So there's massive impact on the landscape. There's also massive financial impact in terms of how much food product these growers produce year over year. And I think a lot of farmers farmers who would want to be farmers get intimidated by hopping in, given the narratives we're seeing, the focus on these large farms. I think I've even heard them called farms of consequence. They're very consequential, but small farms aggregated are really consequential too. And so I would hope that cultural narrative doesn't dissuade small farmers from getting in and being those scrappy entrepreneurs. It is going to be hard. I'm not going to pretend like farming is immediately this beautiful, rewarding profession. It's going to be really challenging too, but there's huge opportunity. And we've seen, even with the pandemic, small farmers succeeding in scrappy and creative ways, selling direct to consumer, starting recurring revenue businesses with CSA boxes, delivering their products to new locations where they can aggregate deliveries. Like, we're all learning together, and we're getting better at it every time we do a new rev. And I think there is just still so much opportunity to be a small farmer in the US. And so I'm hopeful that really no one's going to get intimidated out of taking the leap because of the cultural narrative that we have.
I agree, because there is opportunity in times of doubt where and sometimes it takes that kind of leap of faith in a way, just because you may have this instinctual. I've talked to a lot of people where it's just like, I never grew up this way. I never experienced, I didn't want to be a farmer, but there's just something instinctual, something inside of me that where it's just like, I wanted to be that. And they end up being successful. They end up following their dreams and they don't necessarily have to be super uber successful or anything like that. As far as it's just something that where they're able to be satisfied, where they know where their food's coming, or where they're able to write not only for themselves but others. So I think it's really key that people do like what you're talking about, just following their kind of their conscience, their dream, or whatever it is. That's kind of, don't let necessarily what's going on provoke you from not doing it. Like, it's not, hopefully you could get on there's lots of trends, there's lots of things where you can learn. So I think it's awesome that you guys have that tool where it's providing people with that dream, or giving them a solution to where they're able to follow that passion or follow that dream or expand their ideas or whatever that is. And you guys make it so much simpler of a process for them to do that. I mean, that's something we talk about a lot on the podcast, is just providing education and providing resources. And you guys provide a huge resource. And I invite anyone that's listening to this podcast, or if you're thinking about even starting or expanding your business, your farm, your whatever it is that you have, to download their app, go to their platform, FarmRaise, and go to farmraise.com. I mean, go to the app store. It doesn't take anything to go to an app store or to go to the Google Play Store.
Thank you so much, Dustin. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jayce, so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you so much, Dustin. Pleasure
Perfect.
to be here.
Thank you. Pleasure's all mine.
Thanks for listening to The Recurring Plot, presented by Curb and Turf. Curb and Turf works like Airbnb, but we help RVers to find land where they can park when they're traveling. Make more money from your land. Please visit curbandturf.com to list your property.